Grace and peace to you all, and welcome to the Calvary Road with Pastor Sam Allen.
Love covers a multitude of sins. Love covers. It doesn't expose. It doesn't gossip. It doesn't make light of. It doesn't make fun of. And I realize that this is somewhere even I need to grow, because even in my exposition of this, I kind of make light or make fun. And the truth is, that's not what love does.
Only with Jesus. Only with you.
In today's broadcast, we have part 2 of Pastor Sam's message, New But Not Improved. We're in Genesis chapter 9, and this chapter takes us all the way from Noah leaving the ark up into his death. This is the second of 3 broadcasts, so let's listen in.
Now, when we get to the law of Moses, and some people are like, well, we're not under that law. No, but there's some very good principles in it. And one of them had to do with this principle of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You ever read that passage and kind of pondered it? Thought, it's a little bit strange. It almost sounds like if you knock out my tooth, I'm supposed to knock yours out. But that isn't what it's saying. What it's doing is instituting 2 things. A limitation of punishment. It's saying, if you knock out my tooth, the worst that can happen to you is you're going to lose a tooth as well. It doesn't mandate it. I can forgive, see? But he's saying it can't be worse than that. And so somebody whose store is robbed, and then it's robbed again, and then it's robbed again, and then it's robbed again, and finally out of frustration they set up a little booby trap, and they've got it all wired, so when the door opens, bam, the guy's gone. Hey, that's murder. That's premeditated. That's planning to take a life. And it violates the intent of the law, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Why? It's much too severe, see? You can't put someone to death for stealing. In fact, you know, the Bible didn't even put people in jail for stealing. It had a much better plan, one that I personally approve of, and here's why. If someone were caught stealing, they had to restore 4-fold, 5-fold. Can you imagine? Somebody gets caught stealing $1,000 from you, they got to go out and work and give you $5,000. That's way better than you supporting them in jail while they're watching TV and working out with weights and you're out here working. Now, I'm not saying jail's a good place. I'm not. I visit people there. It's miserable. It's horrible. But I'm saying the system itself works against the offended, because first you're robbed and then you've got to support the thief while he's supposedly being rehabilitated. What's the word? Rehabilitated. Maybe recuperated is just as good. But, see, people can change. They do change. And I'm not arguing against the prison system. I think there are a lot of things messed up in our society, though, because we've taken the law of God, which was the basis for our whole judicial system, and then we've twisted and perverted it and changed it and destroyed it to where it's hardly recognizable. And I think if we could go back to the fundamentals of, hey, somebody, steals from you, they got to repay you. That creates a work ethic in them, and that teaches them that crime doesn't pay. But anyway, I'm probably spending more time than I should on all this, so in these first verses, he goes on to give these commands, and finally, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. Next we come to his covenant. I want you to note 3 things about this covenant. First of all, it is a universal covenant. It's made with Noah and his descendants and all of the animals and all the birds and all the fish. This is a covenant that God makes that is universal. It goes from that time and continues on beyond us. God spoke to Noah and his sons with him, saying, as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. Now, this is sort of a good news, bad news deal. The good news is right here in the text. He says, I'm never going to flood and destroy every living thing as I have in this universal great flood. That's the good news. You're probably thinking, well, what's the bad news? Well, next time he says it's going to be by fire. And I've done some reading in the New Testament on this subject. There are some who say, well, even as the flood purified the earth, next time fire is going to purify the earth, and we're going to get sort of a rehabbed, refurbished, re-put together earth. No, that's not what's going to happen. We're told that the elements themselves are going to burn up with fervent heat. And I think prior to this generation, people had trouble with the idea that everything could be destroyed. But ever since that atom was split, we who live in the time, who understand the potential of such things, we know what Jesus was talking about when He said the last days, the days right prior to His coming, would be a time when we would be capable of utterly annihilating ourselves. Never before in human history was such a thing possible. But not only that, He says everything physical, tangible, solid that seems real will be destroyed. And then He'll just give us a whole new heavens and a whole new earth. Not a refurbished one, a brand new one. Well, that's my personal conviction. Not everyone shares it. I'm not going to go on the road, debating them. But I do believe that that's what the Bible actually teaches about that subject. So we have this covenant. It is a universal covenant. Second thing you need to know about it, it is an unconditional covenant. Now what does that mean? An unconditional covenant simply means that God is going to keep His word no matter what man does. He's not placing conditions here saying, I'll do this as long as you do that, or I'll do this if you do that. There are conditional covenants in Scripture. We'll get to one when we see Abraham. We'll get to one. Actually, that's going to be unconditional as well, most of it. But when we do get to Moses, there are conditions placed upon the children of Israel in the Mosaic covenant and some of the stipulations that follow, where he says, if you'll do this, I'm going to do that. But if you do this, then this is what's going to happen. Those are conditions. None of those exist here. He says, I'm making this covenant with you, with your descendants, with every living creature, with every beast. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood. And then He gives them a sign. And I believe this sign was sacramental. Sacramental in the sense that what a sacrament is it's a sign or a symbol that points us back to a specific spiritual reality or a specific spiritual promise of God. If you're not familiar with this idea, when we share in communion, we take the bread and we take the cup. It's called a sacrament. We have the symbol of the broken body of Jesus, the bread that is bruised and battered, striped and pierced, to remind us of the beating and the bruising and the battering He took for us. We have the cup that reminds us He shed His blood for us. It's a sacrament that reminds us. It's the symbols that point us to the spiritual reality of His death and shed blood for us. Baptism, and if you've yet to be baptized since you've received Jesus, and a lot of people have received Jesus in the last month or so here, when we had a baptism with just a couple people last Thursday night, listen, you need to publicly profess your faith through baptism. And baptism is a sacrament. It is a picture of death and resurrection. We're told buried with Him in baptism as you go down into the water, raised in newness of life, a picture of resurrection as you come up out of the water. And so that's what this rainbow becomes to them. Now, it's quite likely that rainbows were already happening at this point when He spoke. It's doubtful that He says, okay, I'm going to create a rainbow. He simply takes the rainbow and makes it a symbol and a sign of something that now will remind not just Noah and his family, but generations to come, that when a big storm comes, not to worry. Because when that rainbow comes out, He made a promise. And God's always faithful to His promises. He will not destroy us all again with a flood. So He says, this is the sign of the covenant. And He uses that word sign 3 times. He uses the word rainbow 3 times. The covenant I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for a perpetual generations. I set my rainbow in the clouds. It shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant which is between me and you, and every living creature of all flesh. The water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I've established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. So we have God's commands in those first 7 verses. I believe they are still in effect. We have God's covenant in verses 8 through 17, and I believe they are still in effect. Then we have, in these last few verses, we have the curse and then a benediction. But even the curse we're going to see, there's more here than really meets the eye. Now, I've shared that we're entitling this New But Not Improved. And that's because we find, in spite of the fact that God had wiped out all of the population and kept the most righteous man of his generation, that righteous man was still a sinner. He still had a sinful heart. And Noah's situation is unique, I believe, for a couple reasons. At least he's separated from us for a couple reasons. First of all, there's no indication here that this was a spiritual battle. Noah, well, maybe we should read it, and then we'll come back to that. The sons of Noah went out of the ark, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham, the father of Canaan, he becomes important in the story. The three were sons of Noah. From these, the whole earth was populated. Probably worth mentioning. That means every person on the planet is a descendant not only of Adam and Eve, but a descendant of Noah and these three sons. That means in some way we are related. We're very distant cousins, if you will, with every single person on the planet. We're family. And so if we don't get that men are made in the image of God and that they're precious to Him, the sanctity of life, then we need to know that, hey, family is precious in the sight of God. He instituted marriage. He instituted this relationship. Well, Noah began to be a farmer, we read in verse 20, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. Now, before we read what transpires as a result and then the curse that is pronounced as a result, I want you to consider a couple things. I started to share this, and now we can get to it. There's no indication that this was a spiritual thing. It doesn't say that Satan tempted Noah to plant the vineyard, or Satan tempted Noah to get drunk, or to lay shamefully naked in his tent. Now, that doesn't mean spiritual battles aren't real or that Satan isn't real. That isn't what I'm saying. But there's nothing in the text that indicates Noah was wrestling with Satan. There's nothing in the text or in that day to suggest that he was wrestling with the culture. There was no what's up or, high life or this is as good as it gets commercials, There wasn't anybody suggesting that he really needed a bud or a high life or anything else. He just got drunk on his own. It's kind of interesting to me that some of the commentators point out that, well, it's possible that, wine hadn't really, there wasn't fermentation before the flood, kind of trying to excuse the whole thing. There's no reason to excuse it. Listen, Noah drank, and he drank to excess. I don't think you'd have to have any experience to know that, I'm getting a little tipsy. That would be the time to stop, see? And so without getting into any unnecessary territory on this, where was this battle? If it wasn't with Satan in spiritual realms, and it wasn't with the world that we have to deal with every single day, where was it? It was in his own flesh. And I'd like to suggest to you that that's where most of our battles are fought. I'm not saying we never have a spiritual battle to fight. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying the world isn't a problem. But I'm saying most of my problems aren't out there. They're in here. The cravings of my own sinful fallen nature, which though I've actually given notice to that old nature, you no longer rule, you no longer reign, God's in control, I'm born again, I'm a new creature in Christ. For some reason, that old guy doesn't seem to get the message. And from time to time, my flesh wants to rule me. I believe it always wants to, but from time to time, I recognize that, I'm really angry. And I realize anger's a part of my old nature. It's nothing that God is working in me. Or from time to time, I'm just completely frustrated or even vengeful, or things happen in me that I know aren't Him. And I recognize, this isn't the devil. This isn't the world. This is my flesh. These are sins of the flesh. They're the sins of my old nature. And so it is with each of us. Now here's the good news. If you understand there are spiritual battles, and if you know the world does allure and tempt, then you need to know that if you can deal with your flesh, you're going to succeed in every instance. And here's why. When Satan tempted Jesus, we're told that there was nothing in Jesus that Satan could really get a grip on. See, the temptations were real. Jesus was hungry when He tempted Jesus to turn the stones to bread. But Jesus had no desire to feed himself physically, even though he had every right to eat and a real need to eat. He said, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. You see, there was nothing in his flesh that couldn't dominate him. So Satan could appeal to it, but he'd just say no. And that's where we've got to get. And that is something that God is working in you, working in me. So Noah's struggle here was in his own flesh. He became a farmer, he planted a vineyard, he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered, immodest, shamefully in his tent. Now, here's the sad truth. When we sin, we never sin in a vacuum. We are a stumbling block to other people when we sin. And sadly, more often than not, it is the people closest to us that see the worst of us. I mean, let's face it. If we ever got frustrated and just kind of blew up at work the way some of us have at home, we'd be fired instantly. If we ever acted the way we do sometimes in private or in that small circle where we feel safe, if we did that in public, we'd be arrested. And so the bottom line is this. We need to recognize that our sin does impact others. And our sin specifically impacts our children. The Bible says the sins of the fathers are visited upon the children to the third and fourth generation. Now there's a saving grace in that, because in one of the two passages where that statement appears, he says, to those who hate me, and I thank God for that. But here's the deal. Even though I love the Lord, I've noticed that there were a lot of things, just little inconsistencies, not gross idolatries or complete horrible sins in my life, but anything out of the character or the nature of Jesus. I noticed that my children immediately, as soon as they could, begin to imitate those actions. Have you noticed that? If you don't know your kids act like you, you're not watching them. You're not aware. You know what's really scary? Is that, over in the Sunday school, and this kind of stuff happens. Gail was mentioning it. Kids will act out. If something goes wrong, they'll act out. And guess who they act like? They act like you. So the little girl puts her hands on her hips. You do that one more time, and, well, where did she learn that? She got it from mom or dad. Kids learn from us. And they learn the good from us. Thank God for that. But they also learned the bad from us. And here's what Paul said. Though all things were lawful to him, this is the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. Though all things, he says, are lawful to me, and he wasn't including anything illegal or immoral or unlawful, obviously, but he's saying everything not illegal, immoral, ungodly, it's lawful. Though all things are lawful, I will not be brought under the power of any. He purposed that he wouldn't just live by the law, he'd live by a higher law, the law of love, so that he wouldn't put a stumbling block in anyone's way so that they might sin. And I want to encourage you today that though I don't believe Noah was directly or entirely responsible for Ham's sin, he did put a stumbling block because of his drunkenness, because of his shamelessness, because of his nakedness. He put a stumbling block before his son, who then did sin. Now here's the problem. We're all sinners, and if you have children, you are raising sinners. They are sinners. And so they need the very best of examples. One of the things I've always tried to do with my children is when I've sinned against them to go to them and confess that. Not to justify it, not to rationalize it, not to make any excuses for it, not to say if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have done that. Just to confess, I should have never talked that way. I want to ask your forgiveness. Why? That's modeling what to do when you sin. And since they will sin, they need a model not only of somebody who tries not to sin, but what do I do when I sin? So you want to confess to them, and you want to confess to the Lord. You want to tell them, I know God's forgiven me and cleansed me. I want you to forgive me too. And in doing so, you're providing them a living example of how now they can deal with sin. But I want you to see the outcome of Noah's drunkenness, and I hope you know that drunkenness is a serious sin. I mean, if you think, well, it's not that big a deal, all he did was get drunk and lie in the tent naked. No, it's serious, and it leads to so many problems, and one of them here. Ham, the father of Canaan, verse 22, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Now, it doesn't tell us how he went about telling them, but I kind of get a picture like, hey, Dad's naked in the tent, man. You gotta see it. I absolutely have to believe that what transpires here as he's cursed for all this, and actually his son is cursed, which troubles some, but we'll straighten that out hopefully in a moment, is that what was happening here, and in our generation you're almost going to think, it's hard to even picture it. It's hard to believe it. What was happening here is he was dishonoring his father. He was, instead of covering his sin, instead of honoring his father, he was exposing his sin, mocking him, if you will, for it. And believe me, because this is the institution of human government, you need to know that the family is the building block of society. That's the core of all of it. And there has to be an honor and a respect for the authority of the parents and for the importance of their role in the family. And I think what's going on here is relatively simple. Now, there are some who suggest that very nefarious activity took place, that there may have been some sexual immorality or some other bizarre... I mean, I read so many things and I'm like, I just don't see it in the text. And I can't find it in the, delving into the Hebrew language to the best of my ability with all of the tools afforded to me. I just don't see what others seem to see, that there was more than meets the eye. I think this was just a case of him dishonoring his father by mocking and making fun of his drunkenness and his shameless nakedness. But I want you to see how Shem and Japheth deal with this. They took a garment, they laid it on both their shoulders, they went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. Now, this is a beautiful picture for us of a biblical principle. And that principle is this: love covers a multitude of sins. Love covers. It doesn't expose. It doesn't gossip. It doesn't make light of. It doesn't make fun of. And I realize that this is somewhere even I need to grow, because even in my exposition of this, I kind of make light or make fun. And the truth is, that's not what love does. Now, this has very important implications for those of us who are married. This has very important implications for those of us who hope to be someday, or those of us in a family presently. And here's why. Years and years ago, when Barry Filer, assistant pastor here, was doing some counseling, one day he came to me. He's since gone to be with the Lord, died of leukemia, beat us to heaven, and so, we can't really grieve over him going. But anyway, he came to me one day and he said, I just had a sort of I don't know what the word was, epiphany or something. I think it's, it's like that thing, because we don't use that word. It's like when you saw the cartoons and the little light bulb went on over a guy's head. He said, I really saw something that I'd never seen before. I had this couple in, and they just started going at it. And by the way, if you are looking for someone to counsel you, and you want to get together with someone so you can, batter each other, and I'm not talking physically. I know that's not going to happen in my presence. But I mean, if you want to come in and tell me what a lousy wife you've got and how she does this or doesn't do that, just save yourself some trouble, because I am not interested in hearing that at all. I'll tell you why. There are two reasons. One, first of all, I'm just frustrated by all that stuff. I'm a lousy counselor to begin with. I really am. Because here's what I think. That you have no business telling me what a lousy wife you have. If you want to tell me about someone lousy, tell me about you. Because I can help you then. I really can. And I do believe that most problems we have relationally could be solved relatively simply if we just repent of our part in it.
Pastor Sam struck a nerve with me, in a good way, with those last comments. I started out in a sales career at the young age of 20 years old. One of the greatest bits of wisdom that was ever laid on me in my training was to always take responsibility for disputes. I was told that if I did that, I would always be quick to admit my error and always quick to forgive. And frankly, it's been some of the best advice I was ever given. Not that I was always able to execute it perfectly, but I have had a long run of contention-free life, not only in business, but in my personal life as well. And when I look back at the contentions I have had, they were usually because I was ignoring that advice. so please file this away in the For What It Is Worth file.
The Calvary Road is a ministry of Calvary Chapel Chico, and you can visit our website, ccchico.com, or download the CC Chico app to contact us and listen to other studies from Pastor Sam. You can also listen to The Calvary Road as a daily podcast by visiting thecalvaryroad.com. We'd love to hear from you, and until next time, may you find grace and peace as your journey takes you down the Calvary Road.
And your grace